My name is Ryan Peters. I'm a postdoctoral researcher working with Chen Yu at the University of Texas at Austin, and today I'm presenting our paper titled Are You With Me? Modeling Joint Attention from Child Egocentric Vision. Human cognition is, in many ways, a cooperative social process. And one of the key mechanisms that enables such social cognition is when we coordinate and share our attention to an object or task. A huge body of work shows that such shared or joint attention is crucial for early development. It's important for early language learning and other kinds of cultural transmission. It predicts developmental outcomes, including language, cognitive, and self-regulation abilities. And because of these things, it's become a widely used diagnostic marker and target for clinical interventions. From the beginning, gaze following has been seen as a kind of holy grail of joint attention. Indeed, in Schiefenbrunner's pioneering work, joint attention was equivalent to and operationalized as gaze following. Because of that, much of the subsequent work has been designed to elicit and measure how well infants follow a social partner's gaze. In nearly all this work, looking at the social partner's face has been interpreted as the primary behavioral pathway to check a partner's attentional state. And therefore, face looks are deemed as a kind of indicator of awareness of being in joint attention with a social partner. However, several recent studies have shown that infants rarely look at their parents' faces during naturalistic parent-child activities such as toy play or meal preparation. Since infants aren't looking at their parents' faces in these studies, they instead define joint attention simply as looking at the same object at the same time. Crucially, these studies still find predictive relations between patterns of joint attention and vocabulary development, suggesting that awareness may not be a necessary component of joint attention. However, this implication assumes that face looks are the only pathway to achieve awareness of joint attention. Here, we challenge that assumption and ask whether children can achieve awareness of joint attention without looking at their parent's face. Building on recent work showing that attending to held objects plays a critical role in establishing and maintaining joint attention, we hypothesize that hand-eye coordination may provide an alternate pathway to gaining awareness of joint attention. To explore this hypothesis, we use a classification approach that combines head-mounted eye tracking and computational modeling. First, we brought parent-child dyads to play with a set of 24 toys in a naturalistic environment. Then, using the eye trackers, we collected their egocentric views and gaze data, as you see here. Next, using that gaze data, we categorized the child egocentric views as belonging to a moment of joint attention or not. Here are some of the child egocentric views from the dataset. Half of these are from moments of joint attention and half are not. Determining which is which based solely on features in a single egocentric view appears to be a non-trivial task. But this is precisely what we set out to train our models to do. To do so, we fed the child egocentric videos into CNN models and provided the ground truth classifications to train them to classify the images. We then tested the models using held-out data. Moving on to the first set of results, we first addressed the question, do children's egocentric views contain in-the-moment signals allowing for awareness of joint attention? To test this, we explore whether models can classify images as joint attention or not better than chance. And one sample, two-tailed t-test comparing model level, subject level, and item level mean balanced accuracy against chance confirms our hypothesis. To better understand our model's performance, we also look at their RLC curve, which characterizes overall model performance by plotting inverse specificity, or how well the models can detect moments that are not joint attention, along the x-axis, against sensitivity, or how well the models can detect moments that are joint attention, along the y-axis. And this is done for the full range of threshold values used to binarize the confidence scores output by the models. Confidence scores range from 0 to 1, and this black point in the center here marks the threshold of 0.5, which we use to generate our results. So at this point, frames with confidence scores above 0.5 are classified as joint attention, and those with confidence scores below 0.5 are classified as not joint attention. The bottom left-hand corner marks a threshold of 1, for which every frame would be categorized as not joint attention, while the top right-hand corner marks a threshold of 0, for which every frame would be categorized as joint attention. Finally, this dashed line along the diagonal shows performance for a random classifier. So the fact that our curve lies above the diagonal confirms our models perform better than chance across the full range of threshold values. The area under the curve, or the RLC-AUC, puts a number to that, indicating there's a 67% probability that our models will produce a higher confidence score for a randomly chosen joint attention frame than a randomly chosen frame from a moment that is not joint attention. To explore the role of object holding, we also classified each frame as belonging to different visible holding categories based on a combination of manually coded child and parent object holding using the third-person videos and automated object detections to determine the visibility of objects in the child's egocentric views. Using these, we can compare how the model classifies frames in which neither the child nor parent were holding a visible object versus frames in which only the child, only the parent, or both the child and parent were jointly holding the same visible object. These last three holding categories all require there is only a single held visible object, allowing for a clean line of reasoning as to why such views might support detection of joint attention. However, that is not always the case. There are frames in which the child or parent are holding two visible objects, or frames in which the child and parent are each holding different visible objects. So we created a separate category for frames with such conflicting holding cues. Moving on to the results, here we address the question, does object holding provide in-the-moment signals useful for detecting joint attention? And our hypotheses are that models will leverage signals tied to visible holding to detect moments of joint attention, and signals tied to the lack of visible object holding to detect moments that are not joint attention. Focusing on the first hypothesis, we again look at sensitivity, or how well the models do at detecting joint attention moments for each of the visible holding categories, neither, only child, only parent, both, and conflicting along the x-axis here. And pairwise comparisons across the 5 categories revealed that models show greater sensitivity for frames with visible held objects, and in particular those in which both child and parent are jointly holding an object, confirming our hypothesis. Next, focusing on the second hypothesis, we again look at specificity, or how well the models do at detecting moments that are not joint attention for each of the holding categories. And here, pairwise comparisons across the categories revealed that models show greatest specificity for moments in which neither child nor parent are holding a visible object, again, confirming our hypothesis. Finally, we can look at the RLC curves for each of the holding categories, providing overall estimates of how well the models do for each of the categories. And again, the points show the values associated with the threshold of 0.5 used to generate our results. And as you can see, the models do better than chance for all the holding categories, but they're most accurate for frames in which both child and parent are jointly holding a visible object, and struggle with frames containing conflicting holding cues. So we see that models are indeed able to classify joint attention better than chance, and they leverage visible object holding to do this. Taken together, we think this confirms our overarching hypothesis that children might be able to achieve awareness of their parent's attentional state by leveraging in-the-moment visual signals tied to object holding. However, one major difference between our models and children is that our models had a training signal. We told them what frames were and were not joint attention. But what could be the training signal for children? In study 2, we addressed this question. First, based on study 1, we know that visual signals tied to object holding can be used to detect moments of joint attention. Next, we wondered, what if children simply assume they are in joint attention when they look at an object held by themselves or their parents? In other words, what if children can leverage their own attentional state in conjunction with object holding as a training signal to learn to detect moments of joint attention? To explore this hypothesis, we trained 3 different models with joint attention defined using a combination of object holding and child attention. One model was trained using a dataset consisting of frames in which only the child was holding a visible object, and for which frames in which the child was attending to the held object were defined as joint attention, and frames in which the child was not attending to the held object were defined as not joint attention. A second model was similarly trained using only parent frames, and a third model was trained using either only child or only parent frames. After training, we then tested the models on ground truth joint attention, exactly as was done for the models in study 1. Moving on to the results, since we're asking whether models can learn to detect joint attention, our primary hypothesis is that models will show greater than chance sensitivity for the trained categories. However, we also wondered whether the models might be able to generalize what they learned to other object-holding categories and maybe even show similar patterns of sensitivity across holding categories to models trained on ground truth joint attention. So here are the results for each of the models, and we see that all three show greater than chance sensitivity for the trained categories marked in blue, red, green, respectively, confirming our first hypothesis. Next, looking at how the models generalized across holding categories and how those distributions compare with what we saw in study 1 in the upper left-hand corner here, we see that all three models show striking similarities with the models from study 1. In particular, all models show greatest sensitivity for frames in which both parent and child are jointly holding a visible object, and lowest or nearly lowest sensitivity for frames in which neither parent nor child are holding an object, confirming our second hypothesis. It's worth noting that the model trained on frames with either child or parent holding shows the greatest similarity, highlighting the importance of having access to both types of cues. To conclude, our results broadly show that children might be able to achieve awareness of joint attention by leveraging in-the-moment visual signals tied to object holding, and children can theoretically generate their own training signal and learn to detect moments of joint attention simply by assuming they're in joint attention when they look at an object held by themselves or their parents. In other words, face looks are not the only way to gain awareness of joint attention in real time in social situations. There are complementary social signals encoded in bodily behaviors such as attending to objects held by oneself or a social partner. Altogether, I think this work is a good case study, demonstrating how things that we study at the social level can be grounded and embedded in the sensory motor level. In other words, social and sensory motor levels provide complementary rather than competing explanations. Here are my references. And to conclude, I want to thank everyone at UT Austin and Indiana University who made this work possible.